Welcome to Step Into the Story. We are very excited. I'm Barbara Wallace. This is my friend Donna Jones Allward. And we have Denny S. Bryce with us. And we're very excited because I was just saying out there, I have been waiting for her book, The Trial of Mrs. Rhinelander, to come out since I heard it was coming out.
Well,
yeah, me too.
Thank you for saying that. When we were speaking before, just briefly, I talked about the fact that it was research-wise one of the most challenging books that I've dove into. The editor, my old editor, was the one who suggested the story to me. And this was back in 2019. So I had some time in between writing other books to look into it and see, oh, what's going on with the research, blah, blah, blah. This is one of the few times so far where I had so much information crawl, climb, pull apart that it was daunting.
Yeah.
Usually I'm sitting back there with research going, where's some more stuff? I need more stuff to really, bring my readers into this time period, bring my readers into these characters, blah, 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 into this moment in history. Especially when it is that my main characters, for the most part, are going to be African American or Black. Some of my characters are African, according to what time period I'm writing my POV character traditionally. And this one, just quick background about the trial of Mrs. Rhinelander.
Why don't we tell people what the
book is? Just a quick little summary of the story.
Talking to me. I start and can't stop. So, please stop me.
Which we love. No, we love that.
But just for the sake of background, the trial of Mrs. Rhinelander is based on actual events that took place beginning in 1924 in, I guess you would say, in New Rochelle, New York, right outside of New York City. And it has to do with a young woman who fell in love with a young man who happened to be very wealthy. She was not. And the next thing you know, they have a wonderful, lengthy affair, and then they get married. And 2 weeks after their marriage, after they were wed, actually, maybe it's a month and a half, because they did go into hiding for a while. But then she receives notification that her husband is filing for an annulment. And the grounds for this annulment are that she did not mention that she was Negro. And this sets off a lot of activity since her full maiden name, Alice Beatrice Jones, was not raised to be anything but a white girl.
Yeah.
So there you go. And that sets off, and her husband, Mr. Rhinelander, was heir to a real estate fortune. And back in the day, the social register that we sometimes today call Fortune magazine, the Fortune 500, there were 400 people in the social register in New York City. And those 400 were the creme de la creme of New York's high society and wealthy. And he was right in the mix of it. His father, Philip, being one of the kings of the throne, if you will.
The Commodore.
The Commodore. Of course, he was the Commodore. I mean, I love these names.
Didn't have to serve in the Navy, just gave himself the name.
Right. This is so true. This is so true. Didn't see it. Well, I think he did.
He probably did, but I can picture people like that.
A little bit of time.
I'm going to be that. Yeah.
But mostly they just were anointed with titles because they were, if nothing else, barons of real estate and money. So robber barons. But I don't think his history, his family's history went all the way back to the French Huguenots.
Of course it did.
Of course it did. You either were on the French Huguenot hangout trail or you were on the boat, you know,
Right.
with the pilgrims or something like that, you know. Otherwise, your entree into the social register was like, nah, you can't be a part of this team.
Right.
So so that's the backstory. It was, as I said, it was challenging because I literally had access to the transcripts from the trial. I had newspaper articles up the kazoo.
Yeah.
There were dissertations and people writing theses on this particular incident because of its ramifications and impact over racial issues, over social issues, cultural issues, and of course, money issues, who the
Yeah.
haves and the have-nots.
Well, it was a huge scandal in the day, and
Oh my gosh,
it was interesting because part of it was because she was black, or partially black, but the other part was because she dared to be middle class.
Well, yeah, oh, of course, the
So
class.
she had two strikes against her.
Many strikes, but keep in mind my approach to the story. For those of you who are planning to read it, I made a choice, and it was based on my research and my understanding of the time. When you're a Brit, her family were British,
Right.
moved over to this country in 1899, maybe 1897, came, immigrants from England. And the attitude toward race, still racist, but nonetheless different.
Yes.
In England and Jamaica, there were actually I don't even always know how to describe it, but there were mulattoes, there were coloreds, there were Negroes, and each had a different classification. And the mulattoes were not as persecuted, for example, in London, as a Negro might. And
Right.
this, it gets awful complicated. In America, it wasn't complicated. It was one drop rule.
Yeah. I found that really interesting, Denny, that the whole one drop rule.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of that before. And so everything up until that point made perfect sense. And then when you brought in the one drop rule, I was like, oh, doesn't that crystallize it down into what really matters, right?
I knew about the one drop rule, but you felt so bad for her because she didn't believe she was black. So she had to deal with learning how she was perceived in the world at the same time that all this stuff was happening. And
whether or not she would choose to be perceived as, or if she would accept how she was perceived by one sect, by the wealthy, because their family belonged to the whiteist, I can't even remember, church. I'm not even going to try to say all the different names of churches, but they went to the white church on Sundays and didn't have any pushback.
Right.
They worked and had jobs as house servants and maids and domestics that weren't available to people of color during that time period. So their lifestyle, the mother, she was like, I looked up the family in the census, for example.
Yeah.
And the census up until 1924, the mother and all of her children who were still living with her, and at that time that included Alice, were listed as white. And then when Alice started filling out her own census after the hoopla of being in front of the media for such a long period of time, she started to fill out her census as being Negro.
Did you have any input into the cover, Denny?
No, I did not.
And it's beautiful.
Isn't this a bit, okay, let me tell you my cover stories. I won't take too long with it. But with Kensington is my publisher on this book, but I'm, also with William Morrow. What has been so much fun in the early days was the conversation over covers. My marketing and PR background and working as a support person with designers on so many projects, I happen to be just a little bit prickly about covers. So, and I won't say I'm prickly. I'm focused. I know what I like. I would believe in certain things. And so one of my first covers took like 6 treatments to get right. And that's the Wild Women in the Blues cover.
Mm-hmm.
The next cover, I don't want to discuss. The next cover after that was
I know that cover because I worked in Barnes and Noble, and I know why.
Yeah. In the Face of the Sun was just a miss-hit in terms of the cover. It was pretty, but it was the wrong brand.
Yeah.
But we didn't know about Denny's brand at that point in time, or that version of my brand. But then we had The Other Princess. That was like, they came to me and we just did some moderate feedback because it was there. This one came exactly as you see it. And
wow.
So the art director at Kensington, let me find her name, I have to give credit. The cover design was Christine Mills, and the cover illustration was Alan Ayers. And they just got it. And that was from the brief, if you will, from, the back cover copy. So I was very excited when I saw this cover. I was thrilled, absolutely thrilled.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's very striking, and it's. I know, like, so I also worked at Indigo at the same time that Barb was working at Barnes and Noble, and we would often talk about covers that were great, but when you put them up on the shelf, they didn't stand out.
Right.
And but this one definitely does. I love sort of the Art Deco and the turquoise and the whole. Yeah, I like it a lot.
Well, she is this. You can't stop staring at her.
Yeah. But that's because she's staring at you.
Yeah. Well, and she's beautiful.
Yeah.
And
actually, Alice was a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
She was an absolutely gorgeous woman. If I was casting, I don't know who I would have as her, but I would be searching to find someone to be Leonard. I don't know if you looked your research. He was 18 when she met him. He was like 4 or 5 years younger, and he always looked 10 years older to me, every photo. And I was like, Lenny, what are you doing?
I think they truly were deeply in love, both of them.
I believed that. I did believe that. And that's part of what contributed to the direction I chose.
Right.
In terms of the story itself. It's not a story. I think some people, I don't know what, you read the thing and the back cover copy and you have some help. But I wasn't writing a story about a woman who was trying to pass. And
no.
That was not the story I wrote. And
because that wasn't her story either.
I didn't think so. Some people could have chosen that story, I believe. I believe that as a creator, in terms of what you write, especially when you're looking at biographical historical fiction, the history that you study and immerse yourself into, there's still the author brings to the work what interpretation of that information. That's why you can have, more than one author write about the same
thing,
historical figure in particular, because there's going to be something different. There's going to be an element of their history that draws the author. And that's exciting to me because it automatically says there's going to be differences in the way you approach a story. Some of my conversations with my cover quote author, Victoria Christopher Murray, she was very much intrigued by, and she says it in this quote and into her lengthier quote, where she talks about how it was a story that made you want to think about what colorism and those things have to, how they play into our psyche and our interpretation as people, defining other people
Yeah.
just based on skin color or background or whatever. So and terminology as well. So that part of it, but then there was just
I'm,
bad
I'm,
day
I'm,
of the love story thing.
I'm glad you brought up interpretations, because I will jump ahead, and I'm sorry, Donna, because I'm being chatty, but
No, that's good. Go ahead.
this is why I've been waiting for this book.
Okay.
So the book came out a couple years ago about this same trial, and I don't know if you've read any of the other fiction about this trial.
Not fiction. I've read nonfiction that should have been fiction, but sure.
Okay, well, what angered me was she was not on the page.
Yeah.
She was revealed through diaries, and it was done by her defense lawyer and by Lenny.
Oh
and
my goodness!
Portrayed as like
Really?
this seductress from Lenny's point of view, and they gave her, and they go, the lawyer's in love with her too. And I'm like, this is about her. This is Alice Rhinelander's story, and you have just taken her out. She had no voice.
Wow.
And
I did not find that fiction. I did not.
It upset me so much. So when I heard you were writing one, I'm like, okay, fine. Now we'll hear Alice's side, because I mean, this one,
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the trial and what she went through,
yeah,
it's her story. It's not Lenny's. It's not.
Yeah.
And it's not that the book was badly written. It just really frustrated me that they took her out, and which was so. Again, she was silenced. And,
well, what intrigues me by what you've just described are two things. Her lawyer was definitely, think of any lawyer that sticks in your mind from recent times, because he was a go-getter. He ended up being a powerful judge, and he used this trial as a stepping stone for his career. So and he was and that's one of the reasons I deliberately did not want to write a courtroom drama, because a courtroom drama was all about the lawyers. There was not, everything that I read in that transcript were the gamesmanship of white men during a time where this woman was being just used. The one thing that she stood up for, and I don't want to give away plot twist, was a moment where she made a public statement that they thought, what? You're going to do this at this juncture in this trial? They did not necessarily agree with her choice at that pivotal point in time. But yeah, that's, I'm not surprised by that approach, but at the same time, it would never have been something.
No.
Oh, go ahead, Donna.
I was just going to say, like, I know what moment you're talking about, and it was her opportunity to finally control the narrative.
Yeah.
And like, I was surprised by how weak Lenny was. And then, I mean, he really was. He was like, I mean, he did a really good impression at the beginning of the story of being like the guy with the plan, right? But then as they go on, I'm like, why does she even love him? Like, I would be like, dude. Anyway, so I thought, but she was so infatuated with him and so in love with him. And like, it was just this magical thing. And then I really liked how you flipped that. So that at the end, you know, she's the one now that makes this decision, come what may. And, you know, she steps into her own life. And, you know, what Lenny does is up to him. And I really like how you flip that on its end from the beginning to the end of the book.
There were certain bits of history, again, for those who may not go directly to Wikipedia, I'm not going to give away the specific, but there were certain bits of history that just said to me that this woman loved him. And I don't know if she ever stopped.
I don't think she did. I did go to Wikipedia, and I think that Lenny was weak, but I do think he loved her. I mean, I don't think it's going to spoil anything to say they never had another spouse, either of them.
Neither of them had anybody else. And the thing, she did, at least my recollection of the history that I read, she stayed in the same house that she was essentially born for her entire life. And she died when she was in her 90s. Okay. So that's a long time. And then, there's also the sisters. That was another dynamic that I thought was fascinating. Donna
had some questions about the second storyline because it's a dual narrative.
Yeah. So, how true is Roberta's storyline? Because, like, to me, it felt like it really, really worked to sort of increase anticipation or curiosity about what was to come. And it seemed like it functioned that way really, really well. And it created suspense for that A story, which is Alice's story. So, but how true is Roberta's story?
The moment, well, first of all, Roberta existed. She absolutely existed. Roberta's story, other than that, is fiction, except for all of the stuff about his sister.
Oh, but Adelaide.
All of the Adelaide. And that was something I felt, you talk, I teach classes on dual timeline and I'm writing dual timeline. And I teach those classes not because I am the ultimate expert after 5 books, no, but I am a student of the dual timeline. And I am very much committed to its use, especially as you just described, to create mystery, to help drive the central story. However, there are many different approaches to writing a dual timeline. That just happens to be the one I used in the trial of Mrs. Rhinelander, also in Wild Women in the Blues. And even though I don't have the sales of the 7 husbands of
Evelyn Hugo
yet,
similar dual timeline structure,
right?
And another brilliant book that does that so beautifully, except it's a little bit more intense. 2 books: Beatrice Williams' The Secret Life of Violet Grant, also Kate Quinn's Alice Network.
Yes.
Which is meatier, more so shaped like In the Face of the Sun, my second book, where you have 2 storylines that each stand, the goal is to each have it stand on itself. But it's sort of like that parallel, it's that highway and the center line that, as you look into the distance, starts to merge. And that's where the storylines in the distance come together. So
that's a great analogy.
I read that. I did not come up with it.
Oh, whatever.
I'm always going to give credit where credit, it's anonymous, but I loved it because I'm working on another book right now that's due. And that visual thing that I just described is so helpful, because sometimes when you dive into a story, actually it can be one story, it doesn't have to be a dual timeline or 3 POVs like I'm doing right now. Any story, recognizing or realizing that you don't have to give the reader everything.
Right.
The first act. The first act is crazy land. And then it's crazy land. And let it be crazy. And then slowly bring all the, threads and braid them together as you come towards the end.
Now, when your 2 storylines do come together, it's a pretty tense moment, I think.
Yeah, if I can remember when that moment was.
You kind of went there with Alice and the sister.
There was some intensity in that moment that I debated. there was also a scene a pivotal scene that has to do with something she has to do in court.
Yes.
Mhm. There are photos on the internet, in fact, from that moment in court. I left that out when I sent it to my editor, because it was I think it was traumatic to me that someone would have to do that. That a woman would be, but the time period too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Being true to the time period and the position of women, and the, just to segue backward a little bit, we were talking about her commitment and why didn't she walk away? That's not what happened back then.
Right.
I mean, the world, it's similar to The Other Princess, my story where this young woman is a part of the Queen's court, but her life and livelihood is completely dependent either upon the Queen or the man she marries. And that's it. I don't care how smart she was, how well educated she was, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on. A woman's role, her plight, her existence for so many decades, so many centuries through history was dependent upon others. And that's, imagine, I can't, but I write about it because it's there, and I work with it because it makes for some gritty storytelling.
Yeah. And I think that scene in particular, there are two scenes that are quite charged, I think is the word I'd use. But
yeah,
I think the book is a lot stronger for having those in there, because it just crackles in those two moments. So I'm glad that they're in there.
I'm glad my editor reminded me to put
Did you?
I think that the one particular scene in the trial, especially, without it, then you kind of questioning why. I mean, Alice was brittle at the end, but when you realize what she endured, and then you're like, oh well, that would change a lot of people at that point.
Right.
Of course, but let me also add, I did not deliberately leave it out. It was subconscious, accidental.
Yeah,
because it was there in one version, and then I don't know what happened. And I said that to my editor, Wendy, at Kensington, and she was like, put that back in there. I was like, it's not there.
It was a powerful scene.
Yeah,
So one of the things that Barb noticed and put in our chat for today when we were talking about, things that we wanted to talk to you about, was the fact that most of this trial takes place off the page. And I think this is a good place to mention that, because, the times that you did go there with the courtroom, you just made the most of it. You know what I mean? Like, because that wasn't the story you were writing either.
Right. And the title was not my idea. However, I bought into that idea because trial does not always mean just case. It's turmoil that she went through, and the fact that she was judged by the newspaper. She was on trial in the press, not just in a courtroom. And it was never a trial. It was an annulment proceedings.
Yeah.
And in addition to, I'm sort of, I think I lost track of the original title I had was a quote from Alice when she was asked by a reporter, what do you have to say about your marriage? And she said it was a beautiful affair. And that was my title.
That would be a nice title too.
But they said
it is, but I don't think it grabs as much.
Yeah, it's too romancy.
Yeah.
And the story is not a romance.
No.
I'm not going to have those romance people.
We've talked a whole lot about what the story isn't.
It's, yeah.
So now everyone has to read it to discover what it is about. It's a great read. It really is.
It's about a woman's choices, journey, and what it was like to fall in love with money when you didn't have any in 1925,
Yeah.
in the early 1920s.
Especially when you had that one drop.
And that one drop rule came to bear with a vengeance. Let's say it that way.
Yeah, the whole world turned upside down. Like
It was
everybody.
really intriguing, Denny. I really enjoyed it.
I did too.
Thank you.
And we would be remiss if we did not, before we guess your other last favorite question, which is we loved Best Friends.
Oh, yeah. Can't we be friends?
Can't we be friends? Yeah.
I thought your Ella was fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. We had fun writing that book. And as I often mention, Eliza and I started that story in 2019. That's hanging out at each other's houses during our write-ins back in the day when we both lived in the DMV. And so that story was a long time in the making for us.
Yeah.
Just, in between writing other books. And it was a pleasure to work on that book and to also have an opportunity to put Ella's story, or a portion of her story, on the page, because she was an interesting woman, and she was a young woman in the 1950s. I kept wanting to make sure that in the story, that woman, that younger Ella, came through, because she is most remembered by this generation of people for a commercial. Unless you're a jazz person, you should know about Ella Fitzgerald, but there are many who don't, and or they remember her as singing the Memorex commercial in her later years.
I remember that commercial. I knew who she was before that, but
right. But you know what I mean.
Yeah. And we should tell people that if you're interested, we did a whole episode on that book.
Okay. Yeah.
And, praising it highly. So we will put the link in, because that was also a really fun read.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
And very emotional.
It was. All right. So our final question that we ask every featured author who comes on is, what are you reading right now?
Oh, okay. That's actually pretty easy. Let me open up. Part of the reason I get to read early is that I tend to have opportunities to write book reviews. So right now, I am reading some amazing stuff. The first book is called Let Us March On by, let me find the page. It's by Shara Moon. It is the story. Let me try to find the cover because I'm in the book. I love it though. It's not out yet. It won't be out until 2025. But it's the story of, oh, come on, machine. Machine's just, anyway, it's a fabulous book. Check it out. The other one, it's frustrating me trying to find it. There are three that I'm reading right now. I'm also reading a book by Allison Epstein called Fagin the Thief. It is coming out in 2025 as well. It is a reimagining of Fagin from the classic. What is the classic that I'm?
Oliver Twist.
Oliver Twist. Thank you. Amazing. I'm loving this book so much.
Oh, cool.
I can't wait to get back to them with some with a blurb on that book. It's amazing. And then who else? I mentioned Let Us March On, and also People of Means. That's a book coming out by Nancy Johnson, who wrote The Kindest Lie, that came out in 2021, 22. And then The Stolen Queen by Fiona Davis. I have
I have that on my Kindle too.
Oh,
relatable.
Yeah. There's
relatable.
So many stories, but
yeah.
I sort of do this sort of cycle reading because I'm a slow reader, but at the same time, I listen to some, I read some, if I can get them 4 or 5 months before they come out, I'm in good shape. Don't
I actually just started reading, like I read yours on my phone because I have my Kindle app on my phone, which I've never done before. I usually read on my Kindle. And I was just sitting there and I had opened it up and I'm like, I'm going to read. And it was so easy. I couldn't believe I actually liked doing it on my phone because that's not usually my thing. But
yeah, I read, I don't know if you saw what I was holding up I have an iPad. And
oh, nice.
My iPad is I write on my iPad, I talk on my iPad, everything. The phone is connected through it. So because I need bigger stuff. The phone, I have a huge phone, but it's big enough for me.
So Barb, what are you reading next?
Let's see. I'm going to be listening in the car tomorrow to Candide by Voltaire. And that sounds super snotty, doesn't it? But I've never read it, and I downloaded it. I'm like, oh, I'm going to listen to this.
Well, because your husband's going with you, right? So you guys are listening
we
to
have
that
to listen
together.
to something that we both like, and my husband loves classics and nonfiction, so we did that. And I think my next book is going to be the jeweled crown or jeweled tiara.
Oh yes,
the Phoenix crown or the jewel. Who's it?
It's our book for next month. The jeweled tiara, right?
No, it's the
winged
tiara.
That's it.
Janelle's,
yes.
Mm-hmm. And that books are going to be our next month's read, and I think I'm going to tackle that on the plane to England. So
isn't that funny? I am as well on the plane to England.
Another cover that was amazing.
Yeah, and honestly, when we were trying to remember the title and everything, I could see the cover and I just couldn't see the words in my head. So I'm going to read that on the plane as well, and then
you're not going to do Voltaire?
No, I leave on Sunday, so I leave a little earlier than you. So I'll do that on Sunday. And right now I'm reading "Women and Children First" by Jill Paul, which it's a Titanic story, and I'm currently writing a Titanic story that is due way sooner than I would like.
We're not going to talk deadlines. None of us are going to mention deadlines.
Yeah, because after I finished this book, which was due probably last month, but after I finished this book, I have to immediately get into another story that I owe my new agent, because I switched agents recently. So it's like, just right away,
Yeah, I feel that. So. Well, thank you so much for stopping by and chatting with us.
Thank you for having me.
The book is The Trial of Mrs. Rhinelander by Denny S. Bryce. So while we've been recommending all these other books, that's the one people have to read. It gets 2 thumbs up from us.
Yay. Thank you so much. There's a little cup. No, that's the wrong book.
It's a fantastic read. We'll put the links in all the show notes.
I have some glare going on here. That's what I was trying to avoid. But thank you for having me. It was fun chat.
Oh, we're really glad we got to get you on there. We've done your books before. We love you. So I'm glad you could come on.
Great. Thank you.
All right. And we will for watching. And we will see you next month for the Winged Tiara.
On the 17th.
The 17th. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.